It started as a story no one could believe, a whisper that sounded more like rumor than reality. Two siblings who had always been close, too close, some said, suddenly became the focus of one of the darkest murder investigations their town had ever seen. Behind closed doors, what began as an unbreakable bond turned into obsession, control, and ultimately a brutal killing that left even seasoned detectives shaken. They grew up in a quiet middle-class neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names. Friends described them as inseparable since childhood. Where one went, the other followed. They shared the same friends, the same hobbies, even finished each other's sentences. After their parents' death, the two of them relied on each other completely. That dependence deepened with time, and it was that very attachment that would later destroy them both. When the tragedy first hit the news, headlines called it a crime of passion, but no one could understand how a relationship built on love could twist so violently. Those who knew them spoke of how, after their parents' passing, they refused to part ways. They moved into a small apartment together, away from relatives, trying to rebuild their lives in peace. But isolation has a strange effect on people. What begins as comfort can turn into confinement. Neighbors recalled hearing loud arguments, sometimes followed by eerie silence. One woman living next door remembered hearing shouts one evening, accusations, doors slamming, the kind of chaos that hinted at something deeper than a simple family disagreement. The next morning, everything was quiet again. Too quiet. Police were called 2 days later, when no one had seen either of them for nearly 48 hours. When officers arrived, they found the door locked from the inside. What they discovered behind it would haunt them for years. The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, shattered glass across the floor, and there, in the middle of it all, lay one body. The other was gone. The victim was the younger sibling, quiet, reserved, described by friends as the calmer one. The body showed signs of a violent struggle. Investigators quickly determined it wasn't a random break-in. This was personal, intimate, the kind of violence driven by rage or betrayal, and the missing sibling, the one who had always been by their side, instantly became the prime suspect. As detectives pieced together the timeline, a chilling story unfolded. In the weeks leading up to the killing, tensions between the two had escalated. Friends had received strange messages, apologies, cryptic notes about things going too far. One friend recalled being told, "If anything happens, remember I love them more than anything." No one knew what that meant until it was too late. For several days, the suspect vanished completely. Authorities launched a nationwide search. News channels ran constant updates, social media exploded with speculation, and everyone wanted to know the same thing. How could someone harm the only person they'd ever truly had? When police finally located the suspect in a motel miles away from town, they appeared disoriented, pale, and emotionally detached. During questioning, their story came out in fragments. They spoke about confusion, jealousy, and fear, how they'd felt trapped between love and guilt, how arguments had become unbearable. They claimed the death had been accidental, the result of an argument that spiraled out of control, but the evidence said otherwise. The autopsy revealed deliberate force, not an accident. There were defensive wounds, bruises, and signs of a struggle lasting several minutes. Whatever happened in that apartment, it wasn't quick. It was rage unleashed. As details emerged, the media twisted the narrative further, calling it a forbidden bond turned deadly. But the truth was more complicated. It wasn't about romance or morality. It was about possession, about one person unable to let go, terrified of losing the only human connection they had left. Detectives found journal entries written by both siblings, hidden in drawers and notebooks. The writings painted a haunting picture. Two people isolated from the world, dependent on each other emotionally to the point of obsession. They promised never to be apart, but those promises became chains. When one began talking about moving on, new friends, a different city, the other panicked. That panic became anger. That anger became murder. When the trial finally began, it captivated the nation. The courtroom was packed every day. The prosecution painted the suspect as controlling and unstable, obsessed with keeping their sibling close at any cost. The defense claimed years of emotional trauma had clouded judgment and led to a tragic accident, but the jury didn't see confusion. They saw intent. The verdict was guilty. The sentence, life imprisonment. Reporters described the suspect's expression as blank, as if the reality of the situation hadn't yet reached them. But inside the courtroom, one detective quietly said, "You can't imprison someone who's already trapped in their own mind." In interviews after the conviction, investigators revealed more about the months before the crime. They said the suspect had tried to isolate the victim, cutting off their communication with friends, deleting contacts from their phone, and even following them to work. What began as care and protectiveness had transformed into obsession. The line between love and control had vanished long before the killing. Psychologists who studied the case called it a collapse of boundaries. Two people so emotionally fused that they could no longer see where one ended and the other began. It wasn't about physical attraction, it was about fear of abandonment. Losing that bond felt like death, so one chose to make that feeling literal. The victim's friends couldn't reconcile the person they knew with what had happened. They remembered gentle smiles, laughter, long talks at cafes. None of it made sense, but crime rarely does. It isn't always born out of hatred. Sometimes it's born from a distorted kind of love. After the sentencing, the suspect was transferred to a high-security facility. For months, they refused to speak. Then one day they asked for pen and paper. What they wrote became part of the case file, a letter addressed to their sibling, never sent. In it, they confessed not just to the act, but to the suffocating bond that had led them there. "You were everything I had. I wanted to protect you so much that I destroyed you." The letter ended with 5 chilling words. "Now we're finally together again." The case left the public divided. Some saw it as pure evil. Others saw it as a tragic example of how trauma and isolation can twist even the closest relationships. But for the detectives who worked it, one detail stood out. There were warnings all along, the signs of control, the obsessive behavior, the dependency. Everyone saw them, but thought it is just closeness. No one imagined it could end like this. Today, the apartment where it all happened sits abandoned. Curtains drawn, dust collecting on the windowsills, a silent reminder of a bond that became deadly. People who pass by say the air around it feels heavy, as if the walls themselves remember. In documentaries and podcasts, the story is retold again and again, a tragic reminder of how thin the line can be between love and destruction, and how the darkest crimes often come not from strangers but from the ones closest to us. As one investigator said in the closing scene of the documentary, "This wasn't just a murder, it was the end of 2 lives, one lost to death, the other to guilt, and it all began with a bond that should have been safe." And so the story of the siblings remains one of the most haunting true crime cases ever told. Not because of its brutality, but because of what it reveals about human nature. The need to be loved, the fear of being alone, and the terrifying lengths some will go to when they can't let go.